goes on. These are the items I'm going to need to make my jump rings and cut through them. And we've got our piece of silver wire here, and I'm going to start by making a curve in the end of my silver wire with my round pliers, and that will then allow it to fit nicely onto my drill bit. And I'm going to wind the silver around the drill bit, and whichever drill bit size you choose determines the size of your jump rings. So now I'm going to hold the end very tightly and start to wind around. And what I'm aiming to do is make a very tight coil with no gaps in between. You'll notice that when I did my winding, I stayed on the smooth part of the drill bit rather than getting anything tangled up around the spiral at the bottom here, because I need to be able to take my spiral of silver off of the drill bit to be able to cut through it. And the first thing I'm going to do is wrap up my little spiral here in some low tack masking tape. And this is the type of thing you can find in decorating shops because it pulls off of the wall easily where you've had to do some decorating around it. And I need to tuck it in here at the end, both ends. I'm just using my pliers to do that. A pencil would do the same job. So now I've got a nicely contained little bundle of silver there. So now that I've prepared my little bundle of silver here, I'm going to need to get my saw frame ready so that I can saw through and make my jump rings. The piercing saw or jeweler's frame has two slots here and here with wing nuts on them, and into those slots is going to go my blade, which is very small and quite hard to see. So I'm going to draw it for you on a giant scale. We're going to have it slotting in to the saw frame, and it's got a smooth back, this blade, and then the teeth, we need the teeth running down towards the handle like this. Okay, so I'm going to get that ready now. Sometimes it's very hard to see the teeth on the tiny little blade, so holding it against a white background can help. And if you can't see it, you might be able to feel it, but make sure you do this with your fingernail and not your finger so you don't cut yourself. So running my finger down, I want to feel that it's smooth on the way down and jagged on the way up, and that's the way that I will put it in the frame. I've established that the teeth are running down towards the handle now, so my first task is to get the top of the blade in this side slot and do up the wing nut nice and tight. My next task is to make sure the saw blade is slotted down in between here, and before I do up this wing nut down at the bottom here, I'm going to lean forward. I'm pushing forward on the frame, and this has the effect of making the frame gap here slightly smaller, so that when I do it up under pressure and let go, there's a lot of tension on the blade there. So I'm leaning forward, pushing down on the frame, which makes this gap smaller, and doing the wing nut up while I'm still leaning, so that when I let go, it's in there under tension. So now it's time to cut through our jump rings here. And some people would be inclined to hold the jump rings here and saw through the outside with the saw blade. And that's one way of doing it, but it's very easy to slip and cut your fingers, especially as beginners. So what I usually recommend is this instead. I'm going to undo the bottom wing nut here and take my blade out, and I'm going to slip the coil of silver onto the blade all the way up to the end there, so that it's not making the blade saggy in the middle. And once again I'm going to push forward on the handle to make this gap slightly smaller, so that as I do up the wing nut here, it's going to and release it, it's going to make it nice and tight, nice tight blade. Now I'm ready to cut through my jump rings here, and I want to stand the coil up on top of the bench peg here at the very end of this V. So the coil is standing upright. I'm going to hold on to it with my fingers, and I'm going to lean my blade forward so that I'm just cutting through the top few jump rings at the front side, and I've got my fingers behind the blade so I can't possibly cut myself. And the key here is to hold your silver tightly and your saw frame lightly. That's the mantra: silver tightly, saw frame lightly. And I've come all the way through. And now the fun part is unwrapping your little parcel and finding all your perfectly cut jump rings inside. Might get a little bit at the end that doesn't quite match up, like this one, and that will go into my scrap pot and be used for something else further down the line. Now that we've made our jump rings, I'm going to show you how to open and close them and put them on your shell charm. I'm going to use 2 pairs of flat pliers, and I'm looking down the end of the pliers here to tell which ones I've got. And I've got a snipe nose, a pointy pair, and a wide flat-jawed pair too. I'm going to use the wider pair at about the 3 o'clock area on the outside of the jump ring. And I'm going to use the snipe nosed pair, also flat jaws, at about 10 to. So about 10 to 3, a slight sideways twist. So I'm making a gap in there, which is now wide enough to fit my shell charm on. Now I need to close up my jump ring, and I want to make sure that the gap where my saw blade went through is closed up. So I'm going to overlap the ends here. So taking my snipe nose pair about 10 to 3 again, I'm going to overlap very, very slightly. So I've gone past the midpoint by about 1 millimetre. I'm going to ease it back again until it's parallel and there's no gap. The main thing here is that there's no gap for the jump ring to get snagged on your clothes, and further down the line, if you want to do some soldering, having no gap there is very, very important. I'm going to show you how to make the balls on the end of the silver wire now. So the first thing I'm going to do is put my safety goggles on. And it's very important when you're using your torch to hold the torch in your non-dominant hand. And then that allows you to do all your fine work and your tweezer work with your dominant hand. So I'm right-handed, so I've got the torch in my left hand and I'm using the tweezers in my right hand. And this might feel strange to you at first, but further down the line, when you're having to do soldering and having to place careful small pieces of solder into difficult places, you're going to be much better off doing this with your dominant hand. So if you get used to, right from the beginning, holding the torch in your non-dominant hand, you'll be a lot happier further down the line. So I'm going to go ahead and get my torch lit, ready to make the balls here. So on with the clicker. Lock the safety valve on, make sure we've got a nice pointy flame. Yeah, nice and pointy. And it doesn't need to be a very big flame. Turn it down a little bit. Now I'm going to hold the silver in my tweezers with my hand out at a right angle to the wire. And that means that when I put the flame upright and hold the silver up there, my hand is not above the flame. I'm holding it in the tip of the light blue part of the flame and up it zips. Effectively what happened at that point is that the silver turned into a liquid and zipped up away from the flame. And as it cools down, it re-solidifies back into a metal. So watch for that liquid state this time. You can see that the silver's oxidised, and that's caused by a small amount of copper that's in the sterling silver. And this will come off, this grey coating will come off in our citric acid, and then we'll give them a little scrub and bring them back up to a shiny silver again. We've included a small pot of citric acid in your kit. And we're going to dilute this with some warm water to remove the oxidisation from the sterling silver earring hooks. Citric acid is a weak organic acid. It's a natural preservative and it's commonly used in the food industry, often to add a tart or sour flavour. You need to be careful when handling it. It can cause eye or skin irritation, so you want to avoid contact with it if you possibly can, and you might want to put some goggles on when you're mixing up your solution. I'm going to mix mine in a plastic pot here, but you could just as easily use a glass jar of some sort with a lid on it, because if you keep it you can reuse it. A warm solution is going to work faster than a cold solution of citric acid, but if you can be patient, you can use your cold citric acid again and again. Anything you're using in the workshop needs to be kept in the workshop, so you can see I've marked my spoon not for kitchen use, and this will be kept very separate. And anytime you're labelling things, label the lid, but also make sure that you label the actual pot too, just in case the lid gets put on something else, so you know what you're dealing with at all times. So let's go ahead and mix our citric acid. I'm going to use about a mug full of water, hot water, just off the boil here. And I'm going to pour that into my pot. And then I'm going to add the contents of my pot, which is about 2 teaspoons to the citric acid. This will dissolve quite readily and leave us with a weak acidic solution. I can't see any more crystals left there now, so I'm going to go ahead and put my earring hooks, or what will become my earring hooks, these oxidised pieces of bald sterling silver, into the citric acid. I'm going to leave one out so that you can see the difference before and after. Putting the lid back on will help to keep the solution warm. So my pieces of sterling silver have been in the citric acid for a good half hour now, and if I get one out and rinse it off, you'll be able to see the difference. I'm just rinsing it in some water here. You can see the difference between the one that's been in the citric acid for a while and the one that hasn't been in at all yet. So all the oxidisation has come off, so I'm going to go ahead and put this one in so they all end up looking the same. And my next task will be to brighten these up a bit, because they're still a little bit sort of frosty white looking, and we're going to give them a scrub with a brass bristle brush to shine them up. So now that all 4 pieces have come out of the citric acid, I'm going to seal it up and put it aside somewhere safe. And I'm going to switch to some water with a little bit of dishwashing soap in it. So I've got some soapy water here, and I'm going to scrub 2 of my earring hooks, potential earring hooks, and I'm going to not scrub 2 so that you can see the difference after I get them shined up. So now you need to support the piece so it doesn't get bent, and just gradually take your time. And you could be using a steel brush, and what I've got here is a brass bristle brush with some soapy water. And just take your time to give it a good scrub and bring it up back to a shiny silver. And you can see it doesn't take long to come up to a shine compared to the matte finish that we had before. So spend a bit of time getting them all scrubbed up and ready to make your earring hooks with this wire. So when your balled wire has been in the citric acid for a while and you've then scrubbed it with your brass bristle brush or your steel brush, it's going to come up nice and shiny. And we're going to put the ball at the front of the earring, and we're going to hold the ball right up close to the front of the earring, right there, and I'm going to push directly behind the earring so that the wire has to bend right there. Always put your finger close to the area where you want it to actually bend. So the first bend I've made is this one right here, and my earring is hanging down here. And the next bend we need to make is this arch here, and I'm going to show you a couple of different ways. And first of all, I'm going to use my pliers, and I need to select the pliers which have one half round jaw and one flat jaw, and that will fit the contour nicely of the shape that we're trying to make. So look down the end of your pliers to make sure you pick up the right ones. So I need to decide how far this is going to hang down from the ear, because this is where my earlobe is going to be. So look at your design and decide how you want it to hang from the ear. And then we're going to start to make the arch here. And I'm using the rounded part of my pliers to form the wire. So I'm pushing the wire back around the pliers. And I need to move along a little bit and push it some more, and move along a bit and push it some more. Otherwise, if I just bend it all the way around extremely, I'm going to get a very narrow bend. It won't be wide enough for my earlobe. So we come along a little bit more, so that when we finish, we end up with an arch here that's wide enough for an earlobe to comfortably sit in there without pinching. So it's not too narrow and it's not too wide. And then you need to make the other one match exactly. If you've never made earring hooks before, you might want to get yourself some cheap wire and have a good practice run first. So in this instance, I've got some pieces of copper. I'm going to use my practice wire here, and this time we're going to make the loop for the earring hook over a pencil. And this one just happens to be about 7mm, which will give us a nice curve. It'll fit the contour just right for the earring hook. So if you're not used to using pliers, you might want to have a practice at this. I'm going to make the ball on the end of my practice wire here, just with a pair of pliers, twisting round to make my imaginary ball like I would have on my sterling silver. And these are totally round at both ends, these pliers. And I'm going to put the ball at the front, hold it up close to the earring and push directly behind, so that I'm making a right angle just behind the earring here. Same again on this one. And this time I'm going to hold them both together around my pencil at the same height and bend them back at the same time. This could be a knitting needle, a pencil, whatever's going to give you the right former for what you want. Remember, keep your fingers close in to where you want the wire to bend. And then you can see how they're going to hang as well. And then we can go ahead and snip them off to the same length afterwards and file the ends so we get a nice smooth end. So it's a good idea to have a good practice run first. Let's assume that the hole that you've got in your earring is too big for the ball that you've got on the end of your earring wire, and it just slips right through. So in this instance, the ball on the end of your wire is not going to be functional, it's going to be a decorative element, because we're going to have to bend the loop up above the earring. And to do that, I'm going to use my round pliers. These are the ones that are round on both jaws. and I'm going to bend myself a nice long curve that the earring can then slot down into. So you can see that the ball is going to be up here and closed up tight to hold the earring in place. So it's not going to be functional in that it's stopping the wire slipping through the earring. It's going to be decorative and sit at the top of the earring here. So now I'm going to close it up so it can't slide off of the earring. And I'm going to make the arch just the same way that I would for any other earring with my half round pliers. Make sure you pick up the right ones. Have a good look down the end here, and I want the ones that have got a round jaw and a flat, half round jaw and a flat. Bend around there, forming the wire around the pliers, and I must make sure that the arch where the earlobe is going to go is wide enough to be comfortable. I'd make my second one to match in exactly the same way. So that's what you do if you've got a hole too big. Now that we've made our earring shapes match, I need to cut them so that they're the same length. And I'm going to use my snippers here and save any little bits that get left over for my scrap pot. So I need to cut them to the same length. And wherever you make a cut like this, you'll also have a sharp snipped edge here. And I'm going to file that away because we don't want a sharp point going through our ears. So the way to get rid of this is to file straight across the top of the silver until you get back to a round surface. We want to see a round section of sterling silver with no sign of the snipped point on the end. A useful thing to know is that the file cuts on the forward push. So when you're bringing the file back again, it's not really doing anything. So we want to be filing in a forward motion to get rid of our snipped edge. After you've been filing and you come back to a round section, you've got rid of your snipped point, you might find that there's a bit of a burr clinging onto the edge where you've filed the material across. There's a little bit holding onto the edge, and this can make it quite rough. So I'm going to use the file in the wrong direction to get rid of the burr that's hanging onto this edge. So I'm going to come back this way, and this is just enough to knock off the small amount of metal that's clinging to the edge at the very end there. And so what we should end up with is a nice smooth, blunt end to our earring hook, so that it's nice and comfortable when it goes through the ear.